All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. We're back. Yay! I have my act together this week. It's a great feeling. What can I say to not be missing all my appointments this week? Yay! Anyway, but this week we're talking about friendship, and so I think the way that friendship came up was actually during our last discussion, which was on attraction. Mm-hmm. So the place that I sort of found my brain coming into this topic was oddly when Harry met Sally, which put forward that sort of bizarre question, can men and women be friends? Which is just, yeah. I apologize for coming at it from that direction, but it was the attraction and friendship angle that hit me first.
I was going to say, we can talk about why that even becomes a legitimate question to ask.
Yeah, I think that is actually a good thing to ask.
Which is a different thing than the topic of friendship in general. But that question can only be asked in a culture that assumes that men and women occupy very different spheres, and that's very gender essentialist and very heteronormative.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
In a queer world, you don't ask that.
Absolutely.
So the fact that you would say, oh, friendship cannot happen across the sexes, where you are assuming two different polar opposites, in and of itself is like this very compact bit of world building, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which says, oh, we have a world where we assume that there are men and there are women and that their spheres are very different and that the only reason you would cross those is for sexual attraction.
Well, and the other
or
thing
some
is
other family relationship.
The other thing I think is one of the things that we talked about during the attraction hangout, which is this assumption that that a particular type of sexuality means that you are attracted to all people of the category, which is really obviously not true. Right? That men would be attracted to all women as a sort of a default state.
I don't think that's what even the most traditional models assume, though. I think.
Well, okay, so what it is it's perhaps it's not a fundamental assumption, but it is an assumption underlying certain kinds of talk about the relationships between the sexes. I'm not sure, but anyway, so the idea being that maybe it's the idea being that if you are of type A, you would be potentially interested in acting on any person of type B that you ran into, and that one should expect that. It's kind of an antisocial statement in a way.
It's antisocial behavior, but yeah. I think the friendship angle about men and women, about men and women, because that's the thing that people talk about, is not that necessarily you are attracted to all people of the opposite sex, or the sex that you are. You know what I mean?
Of the appropriate gender.
Yeah, but specifically the heteronormative, because that is the demographic that asks the question, and it's not necessarily that you're attracted to all of the pool that is your target demographic. It's that if you are not, they are irrelevant.
Well, I think in fact that one of the things that hasn't been said yet is that there is an assumption that a member of a particular group is not worth considering, that their internality is not worth considering. And that's a thing that's more men angled towards women rather than women angled towards men, because women are expected to sort of anticipate men's needs, which is something that men are not expected to do vis-a-vis women.
Or their own needs. I could snark, but I'm not.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of heavy duty stuff in here. So, this may not be the most fruitful approach.
Yeah. We want to actually talk about like the great friendships of genre fiction.
Great friendships of genre fiction. Yeah, let's try a different angle. I like it.
Yeah.
I kind of want to talk about the great friendships of genre fiction and the fact that fanfic writers, because we are not given, as a culture, we are not given enough examples of just good friendship necessarily. We end up trying to sexualize all of them. So hence, we can't just have Frodo and Sam. We have to have Frodo/Sam, and we have to have Legolas/Gimli.
Or Kirk Spock.
And a question of, how much tension actually is there in that? And so maybe you're right that looking at the eroticism of friendship is a necessary frame. But I don't know. I kind of want to look at the ways in which we don't allow. I thought we had a platonic thing between Sherlock and Watson in elementary, and now they're starting to add more. Are they actually attracted? And I'm just really irritated by this, because I thought we'd actually gotten a friendship model.
Well, that's a slightly different topic. Why do we want to convert non-romantic relationships to romantic relationships in any sort of fiction? Is it? I'm thinking the unresolved sexual tension being resolved, and then what do you do about that? The whole going way back, the Sam and Diane model from Cheers.
Yeah,
but that's not quite dealing with friendship though, because they were coworkers and not quite friends. They were colleagues. Converting friendship into romantic relationships, as you said, is often the province of fan fiction. And
it's a very culturally specific thing, though, to want to do that. And the problem is that we do not have a lot of models. I mean, I'm trying to think of great friendships in genre fiction. Then I know there are. I'm sure I've seen them, and right now I can't.
Well, there are a million different work partner stories, like buddy movies.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily science fiction and fantasy, but I mean,
yeah. Or one
Frodo and Sam.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so one very interesting friendship that has sexual tension in it that never turns into a relationship is the relationship between Gimli I and Estraven. In The Left Hand of Darkness.
Yeah.
I always found that very, very interesting, because it was not a relationship that had no sexual issues involved, right? There was some real intimacy there, physical intimacy, in terms of just like being stuck in a tent on a piece of ice, right? While Estraven was going through his Kemmer cycle, and that was a really difficult time for both of them. But they ended up having an intimate relationship, but it was never a lover relationship. Right. It was always a sort of it was like a literal meeting of the minds friendship, right? They had sort of a moment where they actually had some sort of psychic communication, and then they were like, actually, I'm not comfortable with this. And so they were really negotiating boundaries in really interesting ways. But it was never a lover relationship. right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's actually a really interesting example. And you mentioned Frodo and Sam earlier. Frodo and Sam is kind of interesting in as much as there's a sort of a class difference between them.
It is. That's actually not meant to be friendship as it is meant to be loyalty and Lord and Batman. Is, I think, in Tolkien's own conception. That is that World War I, you know, take your valet with you into battle scenario.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm actually thinking that I've been sort of about to say I can't think of any great female friendships in genre fiction, and then I went, oh, wait, of course it's in Bujold. It's Lady Alice and Cordelia.
Mm-hmm.
Where they really are, they're allies, they're friends, they are supporting each other, and they have conversations that I think revolve. I think they actually do pass the Bechdel test, although there's an awful lot of discussing each other's children and male partners and other things going on. Mm-hmm. But it does point to me that a lot of genre fiction has a lot of women who are projected as lone wolves. Or women who are portrayed as part of community and not necessarily highly differentiated so that they don't get friendships. And that this becomes an interesting litmus test of what is the social structure of your world. And are people allowed to have friends? Because people really like writing these very, what's the word I really want to use for this?
Isolated? Is that what you're talking about?
No,
or?
Not so much isolated, but backbiting in competitive worlds.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You know, I don't know that Austen's characters, Jane Austen to go outside of genre, but adjacent to it, I don't know that her women get to have friends because there's so much competition happening in that world. And where there's so much zero-sum assumption. And I think that in order to have friendship, there needs to be an understanding that there can be mutuality and companionship and support, and that it doesn't detract, and that being in similar status doesn't necessarily lead to contention. And we also have these weird models where you have the, you know, oh, she's my buddy, she's not attracted to me, but she's my wingman as I go and find other women to. And so there are all sorts of weird permutations of what constitutes friendship. And does gender play into friendship? And also, I think we have other cases, because this is genre fiction, of can you have friendship across two cultures? If you are an alien to each other, can you actually be friends? And I think there's a bunch of those stories that I haven't really stopped to think about to have a list for today.
What does friendship mean in your culture? What are the expectations of a friend? You know,
right. I mean, so there are a lot of places that we could go with this. So I played around with the friendship concept in 2 of my stories that I had about the wolf people, because my character Ruli was very he was very rank focused. And in his mind, friendship was a concept that involved a certain kind of interconnectedness, but was not necessarily ranked. It was the type of friendship that he was observing in the humans who were around him, where when you were friends, you didn't actually consider yourself ranked higher or lower than the person that you were friends with. And he struggled with that a lot. So his idea the Ruli's idea about friendship was that it meant interdependence without rank. Now that is in itself a cultural thing, and not necessarily what it means to be friends. but that was what he had observed, and so he had a hard time dealing with it. But he did make friends with the human character Parker. So friendship was like at stake in those stories in a big way, because it's how much can you trust a friend? Are you really interdependent? Do you have, is one of you higher ranked than the other? How can you tell? What do you do if you can't tell? Yeah.
Wow, this is suddenly reminding me that I've been writing a lot recently about the ways in which racialization makes friendships strange in cultures that have a whole lot of background racism. And that people will assume intimacy and friendship in ways that might not actually be considered such reciprocally. And so I have an entire essay I've written about the fact that if you don't get invited into, family events and other things, even if you go out and play basketball once a week, you're an acquaintance or a basketball buddy, and you're not really a friend. And that's one of those things, right?
Well, so there is that question of what is a friend? Right. Where do you draw the line between friend? Because we use the word friend for like Facebook friends, which is not the same thing as an acquaintance that we make at a workplace or at school, which is not necessarily the same thing as a friend that we trust to bring into our intimate circles.
I think that there are other languages and other cultures that differentiate much better in those cases. But English dominant cultures tend to be maddeningly apparently flat and yet actually very hierarchical. And the apparent flatness comes from our lack of distinguished phrasings around these things. You say friend and you don't know what somebody is. You say partner, you don't know what somebody really is.
Yeah.
You
don't know if this is someone that you would ask to help you move, or if this is someone you would help move.
And it's really interesting to me because there are people that I would help move that I would not discuss other things with.
Right. So we have, in fact, it's a very contextually based kind of trust level.
And again, I think that when we're doing world building, there's an interesting place of how do you denote levels of friendship in the culture that you've created?
Yeah, I think if you can come up with a language that's has more words for friendship than English, and then be able to describe them.
If you're writing in English, any of these words that you impose on different kinds of friendship are going to feel very artificial to your reader.
Yeah, and then you have
pluses and minuses to doing that.
If you create new vocabulary, so it's always going to run into the sort of general purpose new vocabulary problem, which is that every time you bring in a new piece of vocabulary that people don't know, they're not necessarily going to have any contextual associations with it. So you have to teach it, first of all. And people are going to have to put effort into internalizing what it means in the context.
I mean, of all the genres we could be writing in, science fiction and fantasy is where people embrace that and have been good about it. And, people take somebody's world building and turn it into a religion. So these things happen. But I think it's interesting to be mindful of that, to know where you're going. And I'm also, because I'm in the throes of parenting young children, looking at what children consider friends, right? And that line between this is the kid that I am always on play dates with, this is my parents' friend's kid, This is, you know, the kid that I participate in certain activities with, you know, oh, there's somebody on my soccer team. And then I think that children sort of fall in and out of an understanding of this is somebody I can tell my secrets to. And so our confusion about friendship starts very young. We talk about it a lot in terms of how we feel about friendship and as adults trying to explore the difference between platonic and erotic interactions. But I think it starts really, really young.
One of the things that I find very memorable about when my kid was very small, their best friend was in the kid that they hung out with all the time in daycare. They were both really tired, and they were having a bad day, and they were arguing or fighting or something. And one of them said to the other one, maybe we should just not be friends until after nap time. And it worked. They just decided that they weren't going to try to interact until after nap time, which was, I wish grown-ups could act like that.
I'm trying to think about that whole phenomenon of catered meetings, and maybe we shouldn't make a decision on an empty stomach, and about crankinesses, and maybe I shouldn't talk to you until after I've had coffee.
Yeah,
that is always a good one.
So here's the thing. There have been a lot of studies of child behavior surrounding the overtures that kids make to each other when they want to be included in play. So if listeners of this show are interested, this is totally something that you could go and investigate. And it's we as adults often like to act as though kids have a really easy time making friends. But they don't. They just put a lot of effort into it. They don't necessarily have a high rate of success, but they have a high rate of overture. So, if that makes sense, they'll approach each other quite frankly about wanting to interact and play together and potentially become friends, right? But they won't necessarily have a lot of success.
And generally speaking, they have a much bigger pool ready-made in our society anyway, of people that you can approach. You go to school and there's a whole slew of people, and until the grown-ups tell you you shouldn't be associating with those people, they are they're fair game for attempted friendship.
Right. And in fact, I think that this is something that's really interesting for world building. What kind of environments are available in this society for making friends? I know that when we were talking with Che was saying it was virtually impossible once you were an adult to make friends. And I was like, well, I see your point, Che. Right. But I think, in fact, contexts for interaction are a really, really important question. How many contexts do you participate in as a member of society where you can interact with other people, where you don't necessarily have lots of restrictions on what kind of communication you can engage in?
I hesitate to say this without Che here to have a live discussion about this,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like this, oh, it's so hard to make friends when you're an adult, is a very straight cis heteronormative thing to believe, because it's predicated on the idea that the cohort you were thrown into by random happenstance because of geography and age is actually suitable for your pool of friends. And for many people who are either marginalized in some way and living in as a person who is shoved out to the margins, sorry, that's kind of tautological, but you may not be able to find friendship until you're able to move yourself into a sphere where you can find affinity groups rather than relying on geography and cohort. And so I think that it's a persistent theme in queer fiction about finding your family later, about the friendships that happen later. And there's also, you know, the tropes about battlefield forged relationships and friendships, and that the idea that as an adult you've closed off your social circle is predicated on one very narrow normative assumption about how you organize your world.
Okay, so I don't disagree that is a thing. I would say there are a couple of different issues though. First, I mean, yes, the question of whether as an adult you have closed off your options for seeking friendships. But also it's what kind of social I guess social events, social contexts do you seek out in order to find places where interaction is fruitful?
And
I mean, because we have affinity groups like convention going affinity groups that are different from queer community affinity groups, right? I mean, to some extent, right? All of these, the problem is that all of these different kinds of contexts kind of intersect in various ways.
So again, I think though that finding your cohort via fandom and conventions is very similar to finding your cohort queerly, right? Because it's, unless you are one of the lucky few who has parents who encourage your nerdiness, your geekiness, and drop you off at a convention young, or at the bookstore or the comic book store or whatever it is, or that you have a science fiction club that's actually healthy and functional. Most people are finding them in their late teens, in their college years, in their very early young adult years. It's a thing of actually going out and seeking it out, right? And structurally, there's a whole lot in theory for folding people into the group. And so one of the things I want to look at here is, to shift it slightly, knitting groups, for instance. So there's a certain kind of knitting group where it looks very welcoming on the surface, but then you go and you find out that it's actually, oh, they've all known each other for 20 years. And they've all babysat each other's children. And they say they're welcoming the young people, but all their conversation is about things they did 15 years ago, right? And so I'm not saying that it's all about an individual's choice, but I do think that acceptance of the idea that it is normal for friendships to close off after a certain age is part of having had the luxury of forming those friendships early without much effort.
Okay, yeah. So I think I think that society does set up interaction contexts of particular types. And schools are definitely interaction contexts where you are expected to meet new people and interact with them.
One of the
You're
things
not taught what the options are afterwards. That nobody's it's like people at school. Go make friends at school, okay? But once you're out of a context that you've learned means you can meet new people, there isn't
guidance. Is that what you're saying?
There isn't guidance. There isn't a habit of. It's the situation that is understood to be useful in getting friends, not the overture, not the speech or the actions, not the participants' behavior.
Okay.
But the location that you are in. And if you're not in the location or in the setting, then there's nothing you can do but get into the setting. There's nothing that you're not taught that it's possible to make friends.
Well, work isn't
a setting that isn't necessarily historically geared towards making friends.
So, one of the reasons I think I'm having so much difficulty with just sort of nodding along with this is that it is a persistent narrative for children who are raised in assumption of assimilation, that when we're young, our peers see us as totally welcome playmates, and that their liberal parents would welcome us to have dinner over and whatever else. And then for many of us, we have a moment where once puberty hits, we get rejected from those friendships that we formed. And we then need to go out and form new friendships that aren't suddenly going to exclude us.
Okay, I think there are a couple of different things going on here. Yes, you're absolutely right that goes on. I don't think, let me just say though, that I don't think I'm trying to say that making friendships at school is easy.
I'm not saying that it's easy or not easy. I'm saying that this idea that it's kind of like the language acquisition theory of oh, you're at a certain age and it's possible, and then you reach another age and then
that's not where I wanted to go with that
kind of thing. Gets bandied about friendship right now, right? In the same way that it did 10 years ago, where they were trying to instill panic in educated women about their prospects for partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, there's more chance that you'll be hit by, I don't know, a meteor or something rather than find a relationship because you've gone past your sell-by date. And I think the concept of a friendship sell-by date is a little problematic.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think we do have this mythology of prizing, oh, they've been friends since they were 4.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they've been friends since they were in diapers next to each other. But there are other intense friendships that form in other ways. And we like I said, we often talk about, oh, they went through the military together. Oh, we didn't go to the same high school, but we went to band camp.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we didn't even go to the same college, but we went to some kind of professional thing. I mean,
sure. Or we went to a ballroom dancing school, or right.
A point of commonality.
I think these are interactive opportunities, I guess. Right. Environments where interaction is encouraged.
Yeah. I think something else that is not always considered in making friends is that it's not always easy to reach out to people.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a risk.
It's a risk, and some people are not good at it.
Well, and some of those overtures are incredibly high stakes.
Yeah.
Especially if you are the wrong sort in one way or another, right?
People who can't read social cues, people who can't read facial cues, you know, being autistic doesn't mean that you can't be friends or don't want to be friends. It means that you're going to have a hard time interpreting other people's words and gestures.
Mm-hmm.
And have a hard time figuring out the right words and the right faces to make.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of things that go into being able to reach out to someone.
Yeah.
And then, you know, what is it that makes someone a friend? Is it, you know, and there are the different kinds of friendship and the different levels. You know, the people you're willing to help move. You're willing to pack up their silverware and their books and whatever and haul them around, but you're not willing to discuss, you know, your personal life.
Yeah. So
are you willing to help someone move that you're willing to discuss your personal life with?
Yeah. So
and
can we go in a little bit of a different direction? We only have a few more minutes. I want to talk about the idea of reciprocity.
Yeah.
Because it's something that is often an issue in friendships, but we haven't touched on it at all yet.
Yeah.
And I mean, I suppose that it's the give and take question, but it's also the question of, well, you know, you and I go out to lunch roughly every month. You know, do we take turns paying? Like that kind of stuff.
I sat in the audience of a panel of an unnamed convention discussing poverty, and somebody flatly asserted on the panel that really rich people and poor people cannot be friends. And some of us who were sitting in the audience together sort of had a collective glare and gritted teeth and anger, because I think it really depends upon whether the participants define reciprocity as a thing that must be exchanged back and forth in the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, as financial reciprocity.
Well,
that there's
whatever
only that
it is.
one
Maybe
kind.
it's time. Maybe it's emotional processing. Who knows what it is? I mean, but there's a difference between it must always be paid back in the same coin in the same quantity. And, person A is better at this thing or has more capacity at this thing. Person B is better at these other things. And maybe what we have is a mutually satisfying exchange where everybody's giving from their surplus and their ease, rather than, no, it doesn't matter what it costs you. Everything has to be fair, right?
Well, fair and equal are not the same thing.
Right. So, I mean, I have really good friends with whom the exchange goes, I might do a lot of emotional processing for them, and maybe they do a bunch of physical stuff for me that I have a hard time doing. And we think that's a completely fair and balanced friendship. And for somebody else, that would be a really dissatisfying friendship. But I think that the freedom to set those lines is really important. And I think that the ways in which friendship is expressed in fiction often doesn't model that. Because culturally, we're not given that model.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's true across many cultures. I don't know that it's universal, but I think that it's very common, and it's a way of keeping people siloed in their little categories, and it's a way of keeping the silos very secure, to say that things have to be exchanged within, right? So then Ladies Who Lunch can only be friends with Ladies Who Lunch, because if you can't set out a proper luncheon with all the cutesy sandwiches, then you can't be part of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be part of the group if you can't eat the cutesy sandwiches. So I think that one of the things, because I'm writing Etiquette for Social Justice primer, is that I talk a lot about what does it take to make sure everybody's getting a fair shake and being taken care of in these relationships, if you've walked away from using these easy models of reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's a thing, right, where I think that as we're writing our stories, one of the important things is there's the model that we've been taught, many of us, of the I don't even see you as blank, I just see you as just like me.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's a different model of I see exactly who you are, and that's the thing that I'm protecting and encouraging, and that you see me as who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we do this to bring it back to the beginning of the hour. We talked about romantic relationships, and that's the sort of ideal romantic relationship that we're given as a template, right? Of each person sees each other truly, and is doing growth and opportunity. And I think that when we look at our friendships the same way, it gives us better models. But it is difficult, and we didn't even get to the fact that it was hold on just a moment, sorry.
No problem.
So sorry about that. So the fact that we can write better models, I think, is really important for us to think about it. But the thing that we don't address is that the thing that gets harder as we get older is that we have lives full of obligation and less free time. And that if our lives are really regimented, then it's hard to take the time away from what must be done by obligation to what could be done to foster friendship.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And I think also that power relationships are a potentially huge problem, both for romances, obviously, and for friendships. And that's one of the things that makes work environments very fraught and not very conducive to good friendships or solid friendships. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I mean, though, I've had bosses tell me, no, I don't want to be your friend on Facebook because that's inappropriate, because there's that whole power relationship.
Yeah.
Speaking of power, my power might be up going out with these storms. So if I drop off suddenly again, it'll be because of that. Sorry about that.
Sorry, no worries. We're almost done anyway.
I know. This has not been a good day for Paul on diving to Worldbuilding, but yeah, so
it's okay, Paul. We're glad to have you here, even if you're just listening. Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, but this also goes into the whole idea of writing the kinds of relationships we want to see in the real world. So I can understand writing about power imbalanced relationships. We also, a part of me wants to say we should also be writing the friendships we want to see in our own lives and in society, and trying to encourage that by modeling it in fiction.
Yeah, it's interesting. I do this whole question of power relationships and relationships when people are at a power differential is something that I deal with a lot in my Varan world. And one of the relationships that I'm thinking of right now is this relationship between a nobleman and a policeman, and it actually has to take place over a long period of time because they meet in a really weird circumstance, because they wouldn't have otherwise met if this guy hadn't been working as a bodyguard for one of the nobles in this very particular situation. But what I notice about that is that there are a lot of rules surrounding the interaction of a bodyguard and the person that he's working for. And in fact, the person he's working for is the one who sort of breaks those rules and says, hey, bodyguard of mine, you should really talk to this kid I know because he has some questions and you're the one who could answer them. And so there's a weird interaction dynamic there that ends up causing the two of them to talk about things that normally this kid would not be encouraged to talk to this guy about any aspect of his life, right? It would just be, well, he's doing his bodyguard job. Don't talk to him, or, only ask him what he can do as a bodyguard, or that kind of stuff. There are a lot of social rules about what we can talk about with particular people. Right. So those are this is just an example of one of the things that makes making friends tricky.
So Paul was just talking, and adding on to what you just said, Juliet, Paul was just talking about we should write the friendships that we want, we want to encourage in the world. And part of me says yes, yes, and the other part of me gets really clenched up because there's so many magical sidekick marginalized people stories.
Yeah, I see your point.
No, really, they're totally different from me, but I can just be me and we're best friends. And going
yeah. But that's not, that's different from a friendship. That's a very surface thing, because the friendship, if you're with someone, is I have to be someone who respects this person I'm being friends with, not I can be me who doesn't actually respect this person. Some of my best friends are kind of relationship.
Well, so beyond some of my best friends are, people who are in the privileged category don't always know that they are doing this, and they perceive that there's a deep friendship, and it may look like that because we've raised our children together and we've helped each other move, and you held me when I cried after my mother died, and you brought me food and I brought you food. And from the person on the less privileged side, it's, yes, we do all these things, but you don't know my inner stories because you can't hear them and you won't hear them. And so I think we want to, when we're writing these stories, think about what kinds of internal lives characters have, and to think about it in their context, not just in those two individuals in that friendship.
Yep.
And that's where that, but my best friend is X and I've never heard them say this. And I've had situations where I don't know X nearly as well as the person telling me does, because, I don't go over to X and we didn't, throw each other's kids' birthday parties or whatever it was. But I've had a conversation with X about some portion of identity that's really meaningful to X that comes up because of a shared affinity or a parallel. And so I think when we're writing our friendships, it's interesting to think about, is this person entirely who they are to this other person in that friendship? Because I think in many cases people aren't. And there are people who have the luxury of being just who they are to everybody. But most of us, our work relationships, we might have good friends at work, but they don't hear everything.
Right.
There might be people that we know really well and are very comfortable with in a faith context or a religious context that don't know other portions. You know, there's a lot of people who have fellow parents, and you're really close, and so I think an interesting part of a story, if you're writing the story of a friendship, is what is hidden in that "oh, but" part.
Absolutely.
So.
Yep. And with that, I'm going to tell you that it's after 5. But I'm really glad we did that part because that was important. So thank you all for being here. Starting next week, we're going to be back on Tuesdays. So our next meeting is going to be Tuesday, the 25th of September. And we're going to have a guest. Maya Catherine Bonhoff is going to be here to talk about a novel that she has coming out, which is called The Antiquity Center, I think. It's a kind of a mystery intrigue sort of interesting story. Maya is awesome, and this is going to be super interesting. So I hope you can make it. Back on Tuesdays, still at 4 p.m. You guys are great. Thank you for being here and for standing up for your viewpoints and making sure that we hear all the angles, because that's what Dive into World Building is all about. And I'm going to stop the broadcast. Bye.